go from looking like this to looking like this? To answer that question, let's start by making our own dough. Make sure your scale is zeroed out and add 200 grams of flour. You can use all-purpose flour or bread flour. The key difference between the two is that bread flour has a higher percentage of gluten in it than all-purpose flour does. Go ahead and zero out your scale again and add 130 grams of water. Now just mix this with your hand, and when it starts to come together, you can turn it out onto the surface you'll be kneading it on. We won't be eating this dough, so I'm just going to knead it on my tile countertop. If you feel like the dough is getting too sticky, just add flour to the counter or to your hands as needed. So after we've kneaded it for a second, look at the texture of the dough. It's not very stretchy. It wants to stay together in a blob, and if you try to pull it, it just tears. If you try to spread it thin, it's just going to rip. I actually always let my bread machine do the kneading for me. Kneading is an exhausting, time-consuming process if you try to do it yourself. But before I hand this dough over to my machine, let me show you how to knead, and I'll also explain why kneading is so critical for producing successful bread. So the kneading process I like to use involves stretching the dough with the heels of my hands. Then I fold it back over itself, I turn it, and then I repeat the process over and over. You stretch, fold, turn, stretch, fold, turn, over and over. The goal of kneading is to develop the gluten in the flour. You see, when gluten is properly developed, it becomes stretchy like a balloon. And it's this balloon-like elasticity that's important because we want to be able to trap air inside the dough so that it will rise and be fluffy and delicious when we cook it. Where does this air come from? I'll explain that later in my yeast video. For now, let me explain how kneading develops the gluten. You see, wheat flour has two proteins in it that combine to form gluten. Let me give you an analogy to explain how these two proteins form gluten. Have you ever gone looking for a rubber band only to find one that's all wadded up? Possibly it's even twisted into a knot. Well, have you ever tried stretching a wadded up rubber band? It's not very stretchy. But if you unwad it, it becomes much more elastic and stretchy. And if you start attaching rubber bands end to end, like this, the combined effect is extremely stretchy. The two proteins found in wheat flour are like microscopic wadded up rubber bands. They aren't very stretchy, but kneading the dough causes them to unwad, and continuing to knead the dough causes them to combine together like very stretchy long strands of connected rubber bands. When they combine together like that, they're called gluten. And dough with well-developed gluten from thorough kneading has a very different texture than the dough we started with. Understanding this concept of kneading explains why grocery stores sell different kinds of flour. There's all-purpose flour, which has an average amount of protein. There's bread flour, which contains extra protein. And then there's cake flour, which has the lowest amount of protein. Think about it. Would you like your cake or breakfast biscuits to have the same texture as bread? No way! Nobody wants chewy cake or biscuits. Using cake flour creates a crumblier effect, especially if you don't overmix cake or biscuit dough. You don't want to unwad the protein in it too much by overmixing it. Let's go ahead and transfer this dough to the bread machine and let it have a go at it. If you don't have a bread machine or KitchenAid machine to help you, just keep kneading until you start to question why you bothered to participate in this madness. Now you can see the change in the dough. It's become more elasticy. The texture has completely changed. It feels tacky to the touch, and as I pull it, it does tear, but much less readily. It wants to hold together and just is very, very malleable in my hands. So there's a way to test and see if you've kneaded the dough enough, and it's called the window pane method, and you stretch the dough and see if you can stretch it thin enough without tearing it that you can basically see light through it. Essentially the same concept as through a stained glass window. You want to be able to stretch it thin enough that if you light it from behind, you can see the light through the back of it, and you can clearly see right there how the light can shine through, and that tells you that you are done. So we just went to a lot of trouble to make this dough, and now I'm going to ask you to ruin it. Using a strainer and a bowl of water, you're going to rinse the dough. And what you're doing here is you're rinsing out the starch from the dough. Wheat flour has 3 macronutrients in it, nutrients that you need in order to survive. Those would be carbohydrates, proteins, and fat. And the carbs in bread flour are in the form of a starch, which actually will rinse out as you massage it in the water. The protein, which is the gluten, is what we want to preserve, and it's not going to rinse out. It's going to stay in a congealed mass as you continue to rinse out the starch. So that's what we're doing here. Just keep massaging it. The water will get more and more cloudy. You can even do this under running water in the sink, but doing it this way saves a little bit. You can switch to the sink after you feel like the water's gotten really cloudy. And you're just going to keep massaging and massaging until you have rinsed out virtually all of the starch. So we've washed all of the starch, or most of the starch, out of our dough, and we're left with this elasticy gluten, which is the protein in the wheat flour. Well, you guys have probably heard people say, gluten, I can't eat gluten. And what happens is some people have an intolerance to gluten, and it causes digestive upset when they eat it. Other people have what's called celiac disease, and those people can't have a trace of gluten without getting very sick. But most people can tolerate it just fine. As long as you eat it in moderation. It's just a protein. It's not going to hurt you. Let me show you a little up close what the texture of this is like. You guys remember when I stretched it earlier, close up, the dough, but now you can see that it is very, very stretchy. You can get it super thin. In fact, it's almost like a balloon. And I've been stretching this a lot, so it's not going to work as well. But if I can spread out some of it, and it actually starts to blow up like a balloon. Now you get numerous little pockets of air throughout this. You can already kind of see how pocketed it looks. And that means that there's little air pockets collected throughout this blob of gluten. And when air is heated, it expands. So every little one of those pockets, when you stick it in a hot oven, is going to have the air inside of it expand, which is going to enlarge that section of the bread. And since there's pockets of air throughout this, we'll see what happens when we stick this in the oven. All right, let's see what's happened here. What? Our gluten blob has turned into a gluten monster. It's like 5 times bigger than it was. Craziness. So the gluten monster smells a bit like meat and actually reminds me of fried pork skin. Let's see what Mac thinks of it. Mac, you want to try this one? See what you tell us what you think of that. He's interested. What do you think?
So this is good enough to eat? Oh yeah, he says it's tasty. Uh-oh.
Oh, no.
Don't let him eat it. You were gonna eat that monster?
Not yet.
Huh?
Oh, there's a mosquito.
Okay, Micah is gonna see. What are we testing here?
A mosquito.
Mosquitoes after you? What are we testing with the Gluten Monster?
Well, Gluten Monster durability.
Durability. Okay, let's see how it holds up. Did it make it through?
Yeah, there's a crack.
It's cracked.
A little bit right
A
here.
little bit. Okay, try again.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna.
All right.
Too.
Go ahead and peel off a little bit and see if Mac likes it. Just a tiny bit. It's gotten chewy. It's not crispy anymore.
Yep.
Oh, let's see the inside. Oh, it's hollow. Look at that.
Mm-hmm. Completely hollow.
Wow.
The globe in there.
With a bunch of little, let me see it, with a bunch of little sections that we're filling with, pockets that we're filling with air. We'll get some of that soft stuff and see if he wants it.
Okay. Here, Mac.
It's like a huge cream puff. We should put cream in it and give it to Dad and see if he thinks it's, oh yeah, that's yummy, huh? Okay, don't give him any more. That's too much gluten. Is that tasty, Mac? That tasty? Ooh, you got a
I
crumb.
gave him a little bit of a little dry part.
Mac approves the Gluten Monster. Micah, you want to taste it?
No.
Sample
I
it?
do not want to taste them.